Welcome to Breaking Banks.
Just came back from DevCon, still not fully recovered. And Alex Gillette at Rise was making fun of me and said, it's because you're an old man and you can't hang anymore. And the problem is not that we stayed out too late, although we probably stayed out too late. Thanks, Wade. The problem is there's just so much rich content and so many phenomenal people. And this is going to be slightly longer than normal preamble because content has been, really over the last 2 years for me, a pet passion because so many conferences just suck at it, right? And DevCon is different, and it's intentionally different. And Jared, I'm going to have you explain that in a second. But if I look at what is the value of Money 2020 is everyone is there, right? Everyone, literally everyone. You can book yourself solid meeting to meeting to meeting. And if I look at it, and super useful to have that density. If I look at the money experience, I love when I'm invited out to Utah to work with MX. There, the audience is so big. Not everyone's there, but it's highly curated, right? Like only someone who really kind of cares at a level around experience is going to MX, right? And the value of the program we do at South by Southwest is it's none of the people you normally hang out with if you work in fintech, right? That's the reason you go there is it's not a fintech conference.
Yeah.
DevCon is in kind of a league of its own of the conferences. And Jared, I want to turn the mic over to you. There's that level of intentionality about what did DevCon set out to do? Because I think that it'd be a misnomer if people looked at it and go, oh, that's Moov's user conference. It is not Moov's user conference.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is not Moov's user conference. It's not Moov's product conference. It's not Moov's sales conference. It's actually a testament of Moov's most important core value, which is give first. And the event is a give back to the individuals in the world who matter most to our origin story, which is developers. So Moov, before Moov was a company, a commercial entity, was a series of open source projects that Wade Arnold said, hey, I think I got something here. Let me scratch my own itch and just give it away for free and see if developers find this useful. Short of the long is they did, and a community formed around this. And while we're still figuring out how to tame this community, how to give back to them, how to engage them in all the right ways, this conference is really for developers within the fintech ecosystem to come together as a give back to them, but also because there's nothing else like it. There's a huge void for developers and technical builders in the financial services and in the fintech space. And we just realized that keenly as a bunch of developers and fintech builders.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the keys to understand about who goes to DevCon is it really is developers. And I would say probably equal amounts product people. I ran into a lot of kind of technical product people and some kind of marketing product people, but you're thinking about a problem at a different level. Like so much of it is at either a technical level or at a user experience level, right? The problem I'm going to solve. And I think one of the more interesting concepts, because normally I hate, kind of panels that are brought together because people talk in platitudes. These were not platitudes. And one of the most interesting concepts that I think DevCon does is this idea of roadblock talks. And why don't you introduce the concept first? What is a roadblock talk? And then why don't we talk about some of our favorites?
Sure. Because this conference is for builders, specifically software builders and technical product builders, anyone who's ever written a line of code in their life or deployed on a Friday knows that things go badly sometimes. They go wrong. Tests fail, deployments fail, things get hacked. Things just are hard. Building software is really freaking hard. And a lot of times we feel like we're alone as a builder or as a developer in that journey. Thank God for things like GitHub. Thank God for things like communities and forums and just ways to kind of share the struggles that we're working through and find the answers to really common problems. But roadblock talks are really highlighting folks that have done it before, have built and launched successful products, or built and launched unsuccessful products, and giving back some insights as to, hey, here's how I built this thing that actually went crazy and was awesome, and now I'm a gajillionaire maybe. Here's how you can avoid some of the pitfalls I had along the way. Or, hey, I had one or two or three failed companies before. Here's the patterns I realized in my endeavors while I was building these platforms and technical products. Here's how to learn from what I did, not make those mistakes, to the technical founders or the builders in the room, because we just want you to be successful. We want everyone to win. So I think the roadblock talk is really good because it's authentic and it's humbling. It's not people up there talking about, look at me and these awesome things that you should buy from me. It's, hey, let me kind of open the curtains back a little bit and show you just how human I am, just how hard this thing is, so that you can get to your successful place faster.
Well, and to put a super fine point on it, one that I absolutely loved was Erica Newland from Orem.
Yes.
Right. Event-based architectures for payment platforms. Right. You are not going to find typical conference platitudes, thrown around there. Right. Like that is deep in the weeds of really understanding some of these things and the issues that come with it. And, I love how she talked about like, we zigged and then we wished we had zagged, but we only figured that out, after some period of time. One I unexpectedly found super interesting was from a mover herself, like defining service boundaries for facilitating transfers, right? Like, yep. What? Like, yep. Super interesting to hear about the roadblocks, the places that people get caught up in. I loved your phrase around kind of the humanness of it, right? Because it's technical, but it's people being vulnerable, talking about things that, went wrong or that they didn't understand and they had to dig their way through.
Yeah.
Did you expect that it would work out that way, this level of vulnerability attached to it?
It's actually hard. I had the privilege of reviewing every single submission, from the call for papers to the slideshows that came in, the abstracts, everything. So I reviewed all of the content, and you could tell that some people were just leaning in hard, like they got it. They've done something like this similar before, but some people showed up with deep level of technical experience and expertise, and were used to selling, right? They're used to trying to kind of put up a little bit of a guardrail around, I don't want people to see the vulnerable side of me. And we had conversations with each and every one of those people. Hey, these are builders just like you. They're here to learn and grow, and they desperately want to hear about your personal story, your professional story based on what you've done. So it's okay to go a little bit vulnerable, tell a few kind of anecdotes or quirks about maybe how you screwed this thing up. And we said, hey, you've probably effed something up in your career. These people want to figure out how to not F it up in their career too. And I think when you say that to them, the light bulb clicks and they're like, yes, okay. And they come back with 30% or 40% of the content completely revised. And it is just them speaking way more authentically. And I think that produces a better engagement and certainly a better kind of like feeling. People come out of that feeling like, I'm connected to this person and I'm feeling inspired by what I learned. I have some tools that I can take back. That's going to help me again with build confidence and hopefully some speed to the successful launch of a product.
And part of that started from the top, and it's a shame that it was a day 3 talk, but Wade, Arnold, obviously founder of Moov, as we described, Ben Metz from the CTO of Jack Henry, Terry Angelos of Drive Wealth, the fireside that they had around building and scaling fintech, right? And the challenges they had, the level of vulnerability, that this was not the high polish, everything has gone right, and if you don't look and feel like me, you're not as successful of me. There was a lot of talk about some of the challenges that came out of Banno and transitions to Jack Henry, and how do you manage such a large organization and what you're setting out to build.
Yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, I don't want to give Wade too much credit. When you're the CEO or the CTO, you definitely get to kind of, you do understand like that most of the people in the room can't come for me, like I'm sitting pretty high. But it does take a very humble individual to allow themselves to be seen that way. And I totally agree with you that people like Terry Angelos and Ben Metz and Wade Arnold, they kind of tower over the room. Their presence, not just their professional presence, but their personal presence and kind of the aura they bring. And so I'm really encouraged to see that they're also kind of in line, or not in line, but they fit in very much. They make up the ethos that the conference is, in this kind of giving, sharing, vulnerable elements of the talks. And I think, like I said, it just really speaks to a more highly engaged audience, and I think people feeling like they really want to come back because they feel connected to the content and the individuals.
Yeah. And that level of connectivity, I guess maybe it shouldn't be surprising given how active the Moov Slack channel is in terms
Yeah,
of people giving and coming back. Why don't we talk about the Slack channel? Because there might be
yeah.
listeners that they may actually exist that don't know that there is a Moov Slack channel and a Moov GitHub. Why don't you talk about what goes on there for a second? And then when you get the influx of users, you'll know where they came from.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that before Moov was a company, it was a series of open source projects. And so we have a community that's been growing like weeds. Thank you to all the developers out there that have contributed publicly to any one of the 41 open source repos that Moov has put up on our GitHub. Also, shout out to anyone who's cloned or forked those repos as well. That's okay. We prefer that you work and collaborate in public, but if you need to fork those things, that's okay. But we have an entire Slack channel that we realized, hey, there's non-developers that want to get involved, or there's people that want to have synchronous conversations that don't really work in the asynchronous format that GitHub really lends itself to. And so we just opened up a Slack. We have dedicated channels for individuals to kind of slide into the topics and the sub communities, if you will, that they want, like ACH and ISO 20022. And so we have dedicated channels for people to kind of find their people and find the questions and the answers that they're looking for. That Slack channel is move-io.slack.com. It's not fully open, but if you go in and you request to be invited, I'll approve it. Probably, unless you have some crazy.
They approve me, so
if you got in, anyone can get in, Jason.
Yeah.
But there's tons of people there, and it's not just developers. We have founders, we have executives. There's definitely some VCs in there sniffing around for the next deployment of capital as well. So, but it's a very open and inclusive kind of environment, and we just want to encourage folks to get the answers that they're looking for, and we want to connect people at the right times in the right places.
Yeah. And so who should be thinking about joining, right? Like you did mention the VCs. Like, do you have to be completely technically proficient?
No, I love the VCs. I have a job because Moov is a venture-backed company, and so thank you VCs for my paycheck, right? But and keeping the lights on while we continue to scale this business to a profitable state. But the community isn't actually built for them, right? I mean, if there's developers in there and builders in there, they're saying, hey, I really wish that there were some VCs in here so I can get connected with, then for sure. I haven't heard that yet.
Yeah.
But it's okay. It's okay because I still think that they do add value.
Yeah.
I do think they add value. Some of these folks are incredibly well connected and also have very wide and broad perspectives on both the industry and also on deep knowledge and expertise on spaces. And so I think that there's oftentimes we're surprised to see the answers that some of the VC folks can actually come up with on technical and functional questions that are posed in the community. Well, so no, short answer is no, you don't have to be technical to be a part of the community by any stretch. But there are builders there the genesis is around developers. Our ask is just, if you show up, and lurking is fine, but we'd like to see people engage. Introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, what you're building, what you're working on. And if you're looking for something to be connected to, just raise your hand and someone in the community, probably me or Wade, will help you get plugged into the places that you're trying to go.
I think the litmus test for participation is you need to be interested in engaging with builders, right? Like I should be giving no one technical advice unless it involves like putting Legos together.
Yeah.
But
Oh, and also no shilling. Please do not come to our community to sell your product. That
yeah,
will be a quick way to get yourself
yeah.
reminded that this is a place for building and building communities and building products. Selling your wares there's probably another Slack community for that.
Yeah. But I would say for those who are interested in contributing to those who build, right? Because there's a whole
Yes.
support layer around this. Like I love the contributions from like Matt at Lithic around regulatory piece, right?
Yeah.
Things
Yeah.
that builders need to know that, hey, I'm a code expert. I am not a regulatory expert. I need to learn these things and I have questions, or like, Shamir and I love to opine on like, the business model of neobanks and what didn't work for Perk Street and Simple, and how do you think about it, right,
Yeah.
through the cycles, right? But it is about building first and foremost.
That's exactly right. I mean, let's not get it twisted. There's a fintech memes channel, right? So there's
But not
there's some
nearly as active as it should be. Like
that's
I go to
true.
it once a day and it can be utterly disappointing, like that it isn't filled.
Yeah, so if you got good fintech memes, please, we need you. Show up. Jason needs needs to be fed.
Jason needs to be fed. Now, one of the other interesting pieces of this last DevCon, I want to shift
Yeah.
back to kind of community and this idea of connectivity, but also to talk about inclusivity. And I'm still curious how I got tapped for this, but you and I got to be on a panel together, right? For those not watching this, but listening to it or haven't seen it before, Jason is a straight white guy talking about diversity, equity, inclusion you put together a rock star panel, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to lie, like you put together a rock star panel and you made it DEI was a very prominent, part of the Moov conference. What was the genesis and the thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. There's a major problem in our industry, and this whole conference, the event, is about learning, growing, and fixing things, building to fix things. Our financial system has legacy software that needs to be replaced, ripped out, updated. We have all kinds of opportunities, and I think this is one that we all feel and see and understand, but we're not talking about it as prominently as we need to be. And I think that's because a couple of reasons. One, it's uncomfortable. This is a conversation that a lot of people aren't comfortable having or even hearing. And so I think it's important for us to kind of continue to create space to have conversations around diversity, inclusion, and equity, and to normalize the conversation without ostracizing or alienating people. But let's talk about what's happening. Let's talk about what we're seeing. Let's talk about what we're going through. Let's talk about people who are struggling, and let's talk about people who are doing it right. And so what we wanted to do is, again, I tell people, Fintech DevCon is not your grandpa's fintech conference. Like, this is a little bit different. And so I did want to bring a lot of the stuff that I had learned at GitHub around building ERGs and inclusive products there into the forefront of what Fintech DevCon was. Both the tech industry, software, and the financial services industry struggle on these topics. And so we just wanted to say, hey, let's just get real here. Let's just sit down and have an honest conversation about what's happening at a high level, and then let's start that conversation and keep it going. I think I think we there was a point where we go, okay, which stage does this go on? And that conversation was like 2 seconds long. It was like, this is a main stage conversation, and it's not going to be conflicting with other talks. Like, this is that important. It needs to be something that no one has any excuses about. Oh, I couldn't make a decision. No, like, this is it. And so we really did try hard to put it in the forefront because it matters not just to the people on the panel and the founders that Moov, but I think it matters to the entire industry. And I'm hoping that we did a good job of articulating not just what's going on, but why it matters and how it can actually make us better professionals and better companies with higher valuations.
Yeah. Well, I told you this privately, and I think you were concerned that, you scared me off when I made the comment about, great, throw the straight white guy up there.
Yeah.
But I was scared. I'm not going to lie. Like there but it also was honored that, you would trust me up there, because if I'm not willing to put myself in a conversation that on a very big stage I could screw up and say something wrong, and if
Yeah.
I'm shirking that conversation, and there are a whole bunch of others, who look a lot like me, that aren't therefore not engaging, right? There's like very little upside of going into the thing where you could screw up and, look bad or unintentionally damage somebody else because I haven't had your experience.
Yeah. And we probably should have said, for the people that are listening and not watching, I am a Black man in fintech, moderating this panel. And I think you're absolutely right. I think here's the thing. We handpicked the people that we want to be on this panel. And I think the reason why you're perfect, outside of the fact that you are probably in the top 0.1% of people that know how to navigate a conversation and control the, just have an incredible conversation with people, is that you've done some of this work, and we knew that, and we knew that you were an ally in this effort. And I think that people really, the spotlight goes on kind of two things in DE&I, and it's like, oh, let's shine a light on all the positive things that underrepresented folks are doing, and let's shine a negative light on all the straight white guys. And I think that's exactly the wrong thing for us to be thinking about. It's like, hey, actually, let's shine a big bright light on all the allies and uplift them and tell their stories, so that people of color, women, underrepresented folks actually know who's representing them.
Kids happen during COVID, evidently.
Yeah, this is what happens. So I don't think I know you are an ally in this way and in this space. And we need to be hearing from folks like you, because oftentimes folks that look like you in our industry hold the keys to unlocking promotion, financial wellness, all kinds of different things. And so the allies, I think, are one of the spotlights we're missing. And I think that you kind of perfectly encapsulated that viewpoint. And we appreciate the fact that you're able to do it with us.
Well, I don't want the takeaway to be Jason thinks he's got it all figured out and he's a great ally, because I still, like, I've been working on it for a long time and I still screw it up. The takeaway I want is people need to be willing to engage in hard conversations and be vulnerable about things like this.
Yeah.
In the preparation, Joan Susie, who, is a female, but she's passionate about aging. The angle for her around inclusivity is around generational changes. But I've known Joan a long time. Engaging with her, she will take you to the mat to have a conversation and call you out if some of your beliefs are wrong. In some of the prep she and I did, I mean, we had out, that was one of the other things that was different, is the preparation for this panel was not get in for 45 minutes and talk. I had individual conversations. Fortunately, I'd known Asya Bradley before, got to know Julie Rasmussen. Like, we had multiple exploratory conversations around this that I feel like preparing for this panel actually made me a better person for it, in terms of opening my eyes and to learn from that. I think, if anything, I got more out of it than I delivered in terms of other value, except maybe, again, to drive home, don't be afraid to have the conversations, including, I think it goes both ways, that recognize that having a difficult conversation, and if somebody screws up, you need to point out that they screwed up.
Yeah.
But do it in a way that what we're incentivizing is not shut up.
I totally agree. I had the same feeling. Every time I have these conversations, I feel like I'm growing a little bit. And I feel like I did on this panel preparation as well. But that should always be the goal, right? It should never be ostracize, divide. It should always be, how do we bring this person in? How do we bring this organization in? How do we help them feel comfortable about the conversation, with the goal of having positive impact and a positive outcome and progress on these really challenging things? And that's how I always hold myself when I'm approaching these things. I hope that everyone else that's listening and everyone else that is pursuing these things approaches it that way as well, because we've got a lot of division in the world. We've got a lot of problems, and there's a lot of things for us to get hung up on, why we're different and how this person is bad or that thing is bad. And really, it's that's not super helpful to these conversations. And so I'm glad that you understand that. And I think everyone on that panel did a great job, I think, of bringing folks in and kind of focusing on education and a positive impact and outcome.
Well, as we need to wrap this up,
Sure.
one of the things I think that is super useful about DevCon from a planning point of view, next year, same kind of bat time, same bat channel. And just to fill into the logistics for people, that would be Denver at the end of August, well, I guess the back half of August to say, or early September when you guys finalize it again. But mark your calendars. But where should people be signing up to make sure that they are on the list that they can register as soon as it's available?
Yeah. So first and foremost, if you're interested in sponsoring, because I had plenty of people tell me, I wish I could have sponsored, sponsorship at fintechdevcon.io. I am on the backside of the email, and I'm happy to get you plugged in. In terms of following us, you can follow our Twitter, Fintech DevCon, and you can follow, I think we have a LinkedIn page as well. I'll have to check that out. But certainly on our Twitter, and also hello at Fintech DevCon. Email us. We'll give you info. It's very early stages of planning for next year. But if you email hello at Fintech DevCon, we'll put you on the wait list for the newsletter and the announcements so that you can be first in line for when the tickets go on sale for next year.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared, for putting on a phenomenal conference, and one that I look forward to participating in again next year.
Thanks for being a part of it, Jason. It was an honor, and I can't wait to be a part of it next year too.
Welcome back to Breaking Banks, the #1 fintech and banking podcast globally in 180 countries. This week, we have a good friend of mine from Australia down under joining us again to talk about his new book. We're going to jump straight into it. Ross Dawson, futurist, engineer, author, and generally nice guy. Welcome back to Breaking Banks, man.
Thanks, Brett. Great to be here.
Now, of course, you've been spending the last few months ramping up for your book launch. It's coming out this week, September the 8th, I guess, this week.
September 6th, the book's
September 6th, sorry, my apologies. So we wanted to dive into it. It's called Thriving on Overload. Really interesting topic, the 5 powers for success in a world of exponential information. Now, this is a little bit of a not a departure from your role as a futurist, which you're obviously very well known for, but it's really an application of that thinking in terms of how the world has changed and how humanity and organizations are adapting to it. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah. So the genesis of the book is that I had a proposal for a book about how to think about the future.
Right.
And I got it to my agent. My agent says, no, I don't think I can sell this. There's too many futurist books out there. But there's one chapter in this book, which you've titled Thriving on Overload, which if you make that into a book, I can sell that one. And so as it happens, when I reframed the proposal and wrote the book Thriving on Overload, it actually managed to contain all of the things which almost all the things which I was trying to put in the book about thinking about the future.
But you just framed it differently, right?
Yeah, but it's far more relevant, and it's interesting. It's really interesting exercise to reframe that. All right, let's think about the future to thriving on overload. Thriving on overload is one of those things that everybody experiences. We all have far more information than we can possibly imagine all the time. I suppose. Not predicted this in the sense, but in 1997, I wrote an article called Thriving on Overload, Problem or Opportunity. And of course, my answer in the article was that it's an opportunity. But of course, whilst we were overloaded then, we hadn't seen anything yet. With more and more overload, that is the context of our lives. Our context of our lives is too much information. So making sense of that, being able to shift from that overwhelm, which many people experience, to one to saying, well, actually, these information is incredible resources to make sense of the world, to make better decisions, to see opportunities, to start new businesses, to create a better future. So in a way, all of the tools of the futurist are relevant to all of us in dealing with the massive overload that we face. And so I think this is a nice way to take these tools and practices of futurists, which, again, has been 24 years that I've been practicing professional futurist, and learned a lot on the way. And
since you were 15,
much of what
right?
I've learned. Sorry?
Since you were 15. I'm just kidding.
Indeed.
So you interviewed a bunch of really interesting people and got their insights on it. You've got a podcast which you have produced for this. It's all available, obviously, on thrivingonoverload.com. But let me ask you this question. Is there anything that came out of those interviews that, took you in a slightly different direction in terms of the content of the book from what you'd earlier planned?
There's many. I suppose one of the most interesting things is this diversity of what I call information masters. And so there are information masters.
It's a cool term, yeah.
Effortlessly are able to be on top of enormous amount of information. And some people are incredibly structured. So there's some who have great structure to their lives and how they do that. So Max Levchin, who co-founder of PayPal
and a firm,
running a firm, yes,
exactly, yeah.
So he says he has an incredible structure to his life. So he says he doesn't need to think, doesn't need to make any decisions, because he knows exactly what everything is structured in his life. And that's not for everybody, but that obviously works for him and what he does. So Tim O'Reilly is a lovely thinker, and he has one of the great insights which came from him is that he said that he took a course once on tracking animals and hunting. Now, he's not the sort of guy who likes shooting animals, but tracking animals is interesting. So is one of the masters in the space who had learned from the Native Americans from how to track animals. And so his thing is you are sensing your openness to what the signals around you. So he says information comes to me.
Interesting.
He doesn't go out and actually looks for it. It actually comes to that, and he says, if I see something more than once, then I know that I'm meant to see that. So it's an extraordinary different approach to a lot of the other sort of type A people. But Tim, of course, has extraordinary track record in being able to perceive the technologies of the future. And so those are, I suppose, the diversity is one of the most interesting insights, and many of those really fascinating different approaches to making sense of information.
I mean, you and I have obviously talked about this, during the creation of the book and so forth. Me personally, I find that I've had to curate my information and messaging sources to get the right information that I want. Email has become the most useless tool for me, except in targeted instances, because I'm getting 800 emails a day, and you just can't possibly read them all. So it just becomes noise. And, no matter how much I try and unsubscribe from lists and so forth, it just seems to keep coming. So now I tell people to contact me through text or through, LinkedIn messaging, Twitter direct messages, things like that have become the alternate ways to get in touch with me to do things. But, I think part of that is the curation. But, do you talk about the density of information that people have to deal with today compared with in the past? There's one of those great illustrations that if you were born in, the early 1900s, most people would read the equivalent of a New York Times newspaper in their life. And now, we're obviously getting zettabytes of content produced. So how has that changed people's perception of information and their processing generally from a, let's call it, an evolutionary aspect?
So this is a really important aspect, is that our cognition as humans, and given our evolutionary history, is not well suited to our current environment. So we start to get stress responses And this starts to essentially give us a dysfunctional state of overwhelm. So this is one of the critical aspects, is essentially our emotional, or in a way the neurochemical responses to what we perceive as not just stress, but almost attacks on us through the extent of information which we feel we have to keep up with. So this is where I believe that we can evolve our cognition positively. There's almost like two directions at the moment, where if you follow the social media algorithms, essentially your brain is getting stupider. It is less able to pay attention. Your attention is getting fragmented. Your brain is not functioning as well. You're less able to spend focused times and to build bodies of knowledge. But we can respond by changing our cognition and our response and how it is we engage with information. And one of them is simply an attitudinal one, of moving from overwhelm or overloads to abundance. And say, well, rather than saying I've got too much information, saying I've got all the information I should possibly want, I will choose only the information that I want from that.
Right.
So if you've got a fire hose, you don't try to drink a fire hose. That's not going to do you any good. It's not going to quench your thirst very well. So you say, well, all right, well, here's a pool of really interesting insight, which I will go to. So it's making the choices. So it is about choice. And that reframe of attitude means that we can start to say, these are resources that I can use to achieve my objectives.
How do you think artificial intelligence as a personal artifact, having your personal AI, might change the way we filter and process information? Is that something you get into? I know you've thought about it.
It's not something I only touch on briefly in the book, and it is more subject for next books as well as just practices. And I suppose my broad comment is, I am astounded in 2022 how little AI is helping us to filter information well. And it's something where I expected a long time ago we'd get these incredible filters, would recommend us the information that we wanted, and be able to get rid of the things which we don't. And well, yeah, we got spam filters, and probably there's a bunch of spam we're not seeing, which we're just grateful. We should be more grateful for that the AI is getting rid of. So there's a bunch of things in the background.
But there's still work to be done.
Yep. And the thing is, in terms of actually not just getting rid of what isn't relevant, but also helping us surface what is relevant, I think this is an enormous opportunity to filter that. And there's obviously quite a few companies that have tried this along the way. Your Flipboards and there's a number of other News 360 and other ones which are trying to create filters for news. But I still don't see anything which is that compelling yet. And I think that there's one thing it tells us it's obviously very hard, but I think there's a long way to go. And I think there's some parallels with Spotify.
Okay.
And do you remember Last FM?
Yes, of course.
So for those who don't remember or weren't there at the time, Last FM started, I think, 2002 possibly, as a music recommendation algorithm. Being able to look at, we essentially could vote on the music we're listening to, but how long it listened to it, it'd be able to feed that into its algorithm to be able to recommend us more. And I still think it's, maybe it's my memory, but it was the best music recommendation algorithm there was out there. Spotify is not bad, but it still gets stuck in the music it recommends. It gets into these, echo chambers equivalent.
Right.
We still just get the same music over and over again. So I've come up with this idea of the serendipity dial. And I've been talking about this for like 15 years. And I still think it's important, this idea of saying, well, sometimes we want more serendipity, more accidents, in terms of saying, oh, well, I'd like to see something which is a bit outside my normal purview, something which is, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. And whether it's in our music or our news, or sometimes we just want to say, look, I just want to know the news. I just want to listen to what I know the music I like, I know I like. But that's the sort of things we need to be exploring is the ways in which we can tune the AI and our technologies to provide us with the breadth
and to
and the
broaden your
scope of what
horizons as
helps us.
well. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Now, one of the terms you had, it's actually on the Small Business Trends website, talking about how to become an information processing ninja. So what are some of the tools that we can use to get better at processing information like you're talking about?
And so the information processing, to my mind, is a cognition. So this is around how do we take information to make it knowledge and insight. So what's interesting there is information by itself is usually not very valuable at all. It's only when information is taken in context, the connections, when we're be able to build these structures of knowledge, that it does start to become useful and relevant and actionable. So I'm interested in what I call the connected note-taking tools. So there's Obsidian and Rome Research, some of the most popular ones now, LogSec. These are related to what has become an increasingly popular domain called Zettelkasten, which is basically, taking notes and connecting them. And these are tools where we can build knowledge. And I think another frame around this is building visual frameworks, and something which I've done and I strongly encourage in the book as well, is saying, let's try to take these pieces of information and see how they connect by drawing them, by putting them in some software to see what comes out of them in terms of a structure. So I think there's many tactical tools in terms of filtering and getting all your email newsletters in one place and to structure things and to capture and tag things and so on. I think there's a lot of tactical tools, and we have a new course, Thriving on Overload, which delves a lot more into the processes and the tools and the tactics than we're able to put into the book. And I think really the big frame around that, being the ninja, is building that knowledge. How do you pull this together to create insight?
And the fire hose illustration or the fire hydrant illustration of information, you've used is a great illustration. But in terms of the overload component, how do you quantify the level of information density that we're having to cope with in society today? I know you talk about the 24-hour news cycles and things like that, but is there a simple sort of way to understand the dynamic, why this is such an essential skill set today compared with, say, 30, 40 years ago, pre-internet?
Well, we have, if you have some raw figures here, 7.3 exabytes of data every hour being produced. And so the growth rate is still in the double digits. We have an average American spends 11 hours on media every day, and that's which is a large chunk of our waking hours.
Yeah.
Well, for some, it's more than that. There's many people, young people that spend 6, 7, 8 hours a day on TikTok alone.
Wow.
Which is quite astounding.
Yeah, I had some good stats, but these, like for 2015, which I put in augmented, but one was that we create the equivalent of all the books ever written in history. Like we create that every 80 days or something it was back in 2015 in terms of pure content. But as you're talking about exabytes and zettabytes and petabytes and all of these terms, what about I know you don't necessarily get into it in the book, but what do you think about the energy implications of all of this data that we're dealing with? Put your futurist hat on now.
Well, I think, there's a number of ways of slicing that. The processing power is the one thing in terms of energy consumption for the data, and that's why crypto has potentially such strong energy implications. But also, if we just look at the total, the data storage globally is 2% of current energy consumption. So that's something which will continue to grow. We are going to start to get some more interesting forms of data storage beyond current ones. And one of the most interesting ones is DNA storage, where the the density of information storage in DNA is potentially many, many times what we have on current systems. Information retrieval might not be as fast, but if we start to structure data where there is some is where we know that we need that faster, others where there is slower retrieval times are acceptable, then we might be able to start to push out some kinds of data storage onto new forms of
New
storage,
mediums.
including DNA.
Yeah.
So these are. So I think the more concerning issue around energy is around the processing power required for a lot of these systems. So the storage is not as critical, but that's still something which is driving an immense amount of electricity usage, and where definitely need to get some solutions there.
And how do people deal with, I know Julie Albright and others have sort of tackled this, but for those that you call information masters, do they need a time out from digital? Do they express that as important, or do many say, no, it's fine, I don't mind being digitally connected 100% of the time?
Well, I think the information masters I know and engage with all take time out. And in my book, I identify 6 attention modes. They include scanning and assimilating and deep diving and exploring and so on. But one of them, and one of the most important attention modes, is regenerating. So the scientific research is clear that our brain does need space in order to be able to pay attention. When times when we want to pay attention, we need to have a more open, expansive frame for being able to regenerate that attention, so that what has been expended can come back and we can use that more. And so there's some great research done over an extensive period of time by a husband-wife couple called the Kaplans, where they looked at what's called attention restoration therapy. And essentially that essentially is being in nature. And there's a lot of evidence, this fact that you get, there's no clear thing to focus on. Things are moving around you, whether it's the wind in the trees or the oceans or the movements. These are things which mean your brain can start to refocus. It is this soft fascination they talk about, where you can be fascinated with the movement of the wind in the trees and how that's moving, and that regenerates your attention. And they distinguish that from the hard fascination, for example, watching a Netflix show, which doesn't regenerate your attention because it's actually still this you might feel that you are taking a break and you're having a rest and you're watching a movie, but that does not regenerate your attention the same way as truly watching the sky or the clouds or the trees.
Or in the case of Ross Dawson, going down hitting the Bondi beach water, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, that's my way of regenerating, is get in the ocean.
So mine is the fire pit, sitting in front of the fire pit, chilling out, watching the flames. That's my regeneration. Or sitting up on the balcony at the place we got in Thailand. But in terms of efficiency at dealing with information overload and the ability to curate and process that information, when you talk to people like a firm founder and a Riley Media founder and these sort of people who've been successful at business, what's the link between this capability in terms of processing information and curating it and success in terms of application on a business side? Is that something you get into?
Well, essentially, that's the entire thesis of my book, is that the key factor for success in this world is your ability to thrive on information. Just, unless you are, well, even if you are a professional athlete, you're, let alone sort of an entrepreneur, everything you do is predicated on the information you take in, on the mental models, your understanding of the world, of how people behave, around how the economy is structured, around what people respond to, around what the technologies that there are, around how those are changing. Everything that we do, every decision we make, all that we are trying to create depends on our ability to take in and make sense of information in a world where there is either far too much or as much as you want, depending on how you frame that. So this is the fundamental capability for success. So I think that currently, the very fact of being successful suggests that you must be, in some sense, an information master. You are able to take and process that, and that is going to become even more the case as the fundamental capability for success is this ability to thrive on unlimited information.
What about in terms of staying ahead of the curve in areas where there's such technological advancements that we see? How do the people that you interviewed and yourself as a futurist, how do you stay in touch with all of these developments? You just mentioned DNA, storage as an example. How do you stay on top of all those types of topics? How do you create that information flow for the right information for you as a futurist?
Well, whenever anybody used to ask me that question, I'd said, read my book when I write it. So I mean, there's a lot. I suppose there's
it's in there.
Many pieces to it, but I suppose part of it is having the structures in which to put what I sense into, and a lot of that is my visual frameworks, and beginning to build these frameworks of where I see the future going, which sensitizes me to the sorts of signals that I'm looking at. So I start to say, all right, well, storage is going to become more and more important. What are the ways in which we might be able to improve our amount of storage, since we're evidently going to need exponentially more? And that starts to uncover things like DNA storage. We can start to see that some of the challenges from climate change, and we can say, oh, what are the responses? What are we doing with new energy structures? What are we doing with distribution? What are we doing with what are the political structures around this? Sensitizes to the relevant signals. So when we start to see the directions, and start to say, well, this is where I see this is a possible or likely path, then without saying that is the future, saying, well, this is the directions I see. Now, what are the signals which will help me interpret to that? Are there signals which suggest this is right? Are there signals which suggest this is wrong? Are there ones which will put this on track? So all of the ways of thinking about the future is one of the best ways to sensitize you to the signals in your present that will help you make better decisions to drive future success.
And just briefly before we wrap up on the book, you're not a big fan of multitasking either, are you?
The evidence is basically is done. So if you're walking and chewing gum, that's fine. Or if you're chopping vegetables while listening to a podcast, that's fine too. But if you're trying to do two high load cognitive tasks, basically the fMRI studies show you that you are not actually multitasking. You're switching rapidly between two that has a high cognitive load. And in fact, you'll never perform as well. So it's I'll take the evidence of the science that we can't effectively multitask. So do one thing at a time is probably good advice.
There you go. So Ross Dawson, it's been a great pleasure to have you back on the show. People can, of course, go to rossdawson.com to check out more information about you. But where can we find more information on the book, Thriving on Overload?
So got thrivingonoverload.com, which is not just the book and resources from that, or our podcast episodes, the course, a lot more there. And of course, or just go to your favorite book retailer and the book will be there.
Wherever good books are sold. Thriving on Overload. Out now. There you go. Well, fantastic to have you back on the show. All the best with the book. For those of you listening to Breaking Banks, Ross is a friend of the show's. Please go and order the book. Let's help him get on the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestsellers list, if at all possible. Ross Dawson, every success with the book, and thanks for joining us again on Breaking Banks.
Thank you so much, Brett.
That's it for this week. If you like the show, make sure to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, or share it with a friend, or share it on social media.
We'll see you again next week with more Breaking Banks.